Welcome to Surrey's on-demand PSHE training that focuses on attitudes, values and equalities within effective PSHE pedagogy and practice. So this training will support the development of your Surrey Healthy Schools approach to wellbeing, health, inclusion and achievement, and is part of a suite of supports for PSHE provided by Surrey County Council. And my name is Sarah Lyles. I am the PSHE Wellbeing and Surrey Healthy Schools lead for the local authority.
And I'm Joanna Feast. I'm an independent PSHE and wellbeing consultant, and I work with Sarah across Surrey.
So the aim of today's training is designed to help build your PSHE subject knowledge, skills and understanding. It's also designed to support the development of high quality, holistic, needs-led PSHE provision in our schools. And fundamentally for this particular session, it's about considering the importance and influence of values, inclusion and equalities. And across Surrey's PSHE training and support, there is a focus on equality, addressing stereotyping and building and maintaining healthier and more respectful relationships. And throughout our PSHE resources, we consider the interrelatedness of PSHE and its importance in addressing inequalities for young people, children, school staff, services, partners, and the wider community. We also consider what comprises high quality PSHE pedagogy and how this contributes to a whole system when we're talking about the whole of Surrey or a whole school approach. We also consider the crucial nature of an evidence-based approach and perspective in PSHE, which is there to enable everyone in Surrey to share normative, strengths-based, inclusive and trauma-informed approaches within our work. Throughout this session, we encourage you to reflect on your own practice and things that go on in your school in order to meet the needs of your pupils. We'd like you to reflect and identify your own areas of strength, and if anything comes to light about the areas that you would like to develop further and strengthen. And just to think about some good practice in PSHE, if you are taking part in this training as a staff group, then just a question, have you established already a safe environment for all your staff to be able to take part in this or to comment on this in a safe environment, which is again just highlighting some of the really good PSHE pedagogy that we would expect in effective PSHE teaching and learning. So the session today, it also supports the development across all areas of your Surrey Healthy Schools approach. In particular, within today's training, it addresses many of the standards within Theme 1, which is a whole school approach, Theme 2, which is PSHE, and Theme 5, which is health, with a focus on emotional well-being and mental health. So again, taking it back to the whole school approach, it is about looking at your own school values and your school vision and your intent. And also the links between that and your school culture to attendance as well, supporting the attendance of all pupils, in particular those that may be more vulnerable or have protected characteristics, but essentially all of your pupils. Theme 2, PSHE, again, just thinking about your monitoring and does your monitoring and assessment, does it help to embed the PSHE knowledge, understanding and skills, whilst also enabling the pupils to reflect upon their own and on others' attitudes and values? That's really closely related to today's training. And just to think about planned opportunities for pupil voice to influence and impact upon your vision and values and school ethos. And there's another standard in here that I didn't put onto the PowerPoint because I thought it was a little bit over full if I put any more on, but also standard 1.4.4 in your whole school approach around really addressing the 2010 Equality Act and making sure that you've got due regard for fostering good relations across all characteristics in your school. So lots of joined up and effective work going on there. So the Surrey evidence-based approach, we take we base all of our work in the evidence and the research that underpins effective PSHE. So normative education, do we make sure that we have a sound appreciation of what young people and their peers are actually doing? Do we look at the data, whether that be qualitative or quantitative data? And do we see that the majority of young people are engaging in healthy behaviours for the majority of the time? And is that what we stress through our PSHE lessons and our school culture? Because what we don't want is we don't want to just have a generalised perception, which can often be inaccurate. So is data informing your PSHE teaching and learning? And are we really strengthening the resolve for our young people? Strengths-based approach links nicely to normative education. So when we're taking a look at our PSHE and the planning for PSHE, do we think about how to look at what the young people, what the pupils are already good at, so that we can build on that and foster more positivity and greater confidence in order to then meet any gaps that they may have in their knowledge with their skills, or even within appreciation of attitudes and values. Trauma-informed, the third point on this diagram. Are we trauma-informed in our practice? And essentially that is to say, are we compassionate, are we considerate, and are we kind in the way that we plan and deliver and monitor our PSHE curriculum? Do we link to that strengths-based and that normative approach? And do those elements all intertwined? Do we make sure that we don't shock our young people? We don't induce fear or guilt within our PSHE curriculum, other curriculum subjects, or within our wider school culture? Do we take a restorative approach? Do we seek to unpick and delve into emotional intelligence and our emotional needs in order to move situations on? A restorative approach doesn't always solve an issue, but it certainly should be an important part of working to resolve it and move it forwards. And that can be taught through PSHE curriculum and really help your relationship and behaviour policies and practice in your school. Moving on to the next little button on the PowerPoint. Is this also part of your whole system approach? Do these elements run through the whole of your school, for your staff, for your pupils, through your policies, your procedures, your curriculum, through your formal curriculum and informal curriculum, assembly structure, and so forth? So are we really seeing this across your whole system or your whole school? And are we being inclusive? Do we have an appreciation of difference and diversity? And do we work for that equity and that aspiration for all of our young people? So just moving on a little bit through the essential underpinnings of the evidence-based approach, to actually then just thinking a little bit about what shapes our values. And that is a huge question. And you can see on the slide that there are many elements that we've just picked out. There's so much more that could have been included on this slide, but so many elements come together to shape our attitudes and values, many of which, unless we really step back and think about it, many of which can be unaware. Just thinking about and just reflecting internally about yourselves, where do your attitudes and values come from? Have you even thought about that? Some people will have done and some people won't, and some other people will be somewhere in the mid ground with that. But if you just think about the influences in your life, it could have been parents, it could have been carers, and these values could be positive and empowering values, or they could be more disempowering values. Values aren't always positive in nature. So again, where do our attitudes and values come from? Do they come from friends? How do they influence us? Just thinking about your school days yourself, when you were at school and a pupil, what influenced you when you were at school? What was your friendship group like? And how did that make you feel? And how has it shaped your values for now? Now you're an adult and working with young people yourselves. So there's many things on there, and I'm sure you'll come up with more. Just taking that on a stage further, and some of you may still be thinking about that previous slide, but how might your own values impact and possibly affect the way that you teach? And your value, they could impact on your teaching in a really positive way. So how are you using your attitudes and values to really help attune and empathize and be compassionate with your young people? It's really helpful to be aware of how our values can impact on our teaching and on our relationships with others, and that includes other staff. It can include, of course, parents and carers, and of course it includes the pupils. There may, however, be times when our personal values conflict or are at odds with the value of other staff. And there may be times when our values conflict with our professional values. Not always a problem if we are aware of where the conflict may be, and if we are aware of how best to deal with this as and when it arises. And are your own values in line with your school's vision, values and intent? So are you aware of these things? Are you behind your school's vision and values? And what can be done to make things work much more smoothly and seamlessly and be very empowering in the way that you are working? And the question here is, how do you manage this? If things aren't in alignment, how can this be managed? What can you do to make sure that there is consistency in the way that you are working within your school environment and with your young people? This may be something that you've reflected upon and are very aware of, or it may be something that until this moment in this training you've not really considered. It's not only what we say that conveys our values. Importantly, it's also how we say it, in our intonation and in our body language. And there have been times where I've said something and I've been thinking that I was being quite positive about something or supportive, when I have actually been picked up on, well, your body language is saying this or the intonation is saying that. So it can catch us out even if we think that we are aware of our values and attitudes. How it comes across to others can sometimes be different. So it's just worth thinking about.
I think a lot of what we're covering today and in this session is to prompt pondering, to prompt thinking, reflection, which is one of the underpinning principles of good PSHE pedagogy, but also just good continuing professional development, I think. And so moving on now to be aware of equality and inequality, therefore. I believe it's really useful to have this starting point of what is normal or to be expected cognitive behaviour in humans. And one of the things I think that we can expect, or that the research says that we can expect, is that we as humans were very naturally motivated to categorise people and objects. It's an evolutionarily useful tool for us. And it really does help us to make decisions in the moment after a little bit more thinking. And I think that's an important point to make. When we then drift into discrimination, that goes beyond this normal cognitive behaviour or this to be expected cognitive behaviour. We know that the research shows us that the attitudes of people who discriminate are really a reflection of a really complex set of factors. And this includes things like their own history, their socio-cultural practices, their economic forces in play in their life at that time, any sociological trends, so things in society or their social group which are having an effect on them, the influence of their community and their family beliefs. So all the things that Sarah's already mentioned, we know that these sorts of things can have an impact on attitudes and how people can therefore discriminate. So it's an awareness to be had. It's a pondering. We're not here to say you mustn't have these feelings at all. That is not what this is about. What we're trying to support in teachers and those working with children and young people is an awareness. That is all. So being aware of inequalities is the first step. And it's not a case of saying we have to do much about it. We have to be aware. And it leads us then very neatly into stereotyping. When we think about stereotyping, we as society can make some presumptions that many people understand these things on the slide. Many people understand racism is wrong. Abusing someone who is or who is perceived to be gay is wrong. Many people understand these things. And I think it's important to focus on the fact that, yeah, many people understand these things. Many people also know that intolerance because someone doesn't speak very good English is wrong. Maybe teasing someone because of their physical appearance is wrong. Many people know this, and we can, I'm sure, between us, think of lots of different other ideas and statements that would fit onto this slide. We also can acknowledge that many people believe that calling someone stupid because they're finding something difficult is wrong. Teasing someone because they can't draw is wrong. Anything like this, any statement could fit, or any relevant statement could fit onto this slide, and many people believe these things. And I think it's important to acknowledge this is to be expected cognitive behaviour. But why do these things still happen? Another pondering question. And more crucially to what we're looking at today, why do they happen in schools and in wider society? Why are they still going on? I'm not saying I have the answers, but I think it's really important to consider these questions. Why are these things still happening? Well, we've got some ideas, and we shall move on to some of those possible explanations now. The first thing is to acknowledge that we notice differences. We all notice difference all the time. And when does this reaction become a problem? So some more questions for you. When do we perhaps do a double take? When might we flinch? When might we be aware that we're making assumptions? And what do those assumptions lead us to do in our behaviour or in what we say? When might we treat someone differently based on their difference from us, or perhaps from the people around us? Then a little bit deeper, when do we decide that someone has fewer rights than us? And when I say rights, I mean basic human rights. And then ultimately, when do we stop seeing someone as a person? Language is very much involved here. The way that we perceive people is involved here too. So these are all questions to ponder. And then we come into the realm of anti-diversity. It's purposefully in inverted commas because it's a bit of a clumsy way of making a point, but I hope that it transmits what we're trying to say here. So a few examples, some of the things that some people might do and how that links to stereotyping and discrimination. We may, and I'm saying we, some people I think is a better way of expressing it, may normalise, and they may inadvertently or perhaps deliberately put one group in a more normal category than another. They might instead discriminates, where they treat someone differently because of a difference that may be real or it may be perceived to them. Assumptions are a massive part of this sort of anti-diversity way of thinking, or discriminatory or stereotypical type behaviour or attitudes, where we assume or we group people together and therefore we start to make an assumption about them. And we might in that way demonise a particular stereotype. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, language, using language that you might recognise is offensive to some people, or perhaps an image or imagery that might be offensive. All of these things, gradual shades of anti-diversity that we can notice in ourselves if we're very brave, and we can also notice in others. More examples here, I'll just pick out a few, perhaps highlighting differences often in a scathing way, and we might not notice when this is happening until it's called out by someone else, and then we notice it everywhere that we go. It may be that some people mock things that are important to others, and particularly a few years ago, and perhaps still now, the idea that, oh, this is going too far in the way of political correctness. That was often with a very mocking, belittling way of talking, so insinuating that too much is being made about something that someone feels isn't important. So the other examples on here also show that there are lots of different shades of anti-diversity. I will stress that none of this here is meant to shame or be sort of fearful in any way. It's noticing. It's making observations about how we are as humans and how we got here. That is all. I think the important thing to note here is that it is possible to change it. And we do know that change can take a long time. The first 2 points on here could sort of be interchangeable, really, and none of these is particularly in a great order. But I think it's really useful to note that education can be seen as the forerunner of all of these things, because education underpins society. It's usually at the forefront of change. And it doesn't necessarily have to be law for something to be educated about. So we can, in schools, with our children and young people, serve to educate about change. We can have increased awareness, particularly in the media. We can ask more questions, and by that I mean a sort of a challenge the idea, not the person sort of questions. We can acknowledge a full spectrum of diversity, and we might choose to do that through the media, for example, children's television, or in other ways. And one of the ones I want to focus on a little bit more is the understanding of the theory that underpins how we can make change. And one of those is social learning theory. The thing about social learning theory is that, yes, it was done quite a long time ago, 1961, but a lot of research that's been done since has found fairly similar findings. And I think that's an important thing to highlight. The original study by Albert Bandura was done at Stanford University in 1961, and he was studying aggression, particularly in children. And as you can see from the fairly blurry photos, he was using 3 and 5 foot tall inflatable plastic dolls called Bobo dolls. Doesn't really matter what the name was, that's just what they were called. And they were painted to look like cartoon clowns and were bottom weighted. So when you hit them, they would pop straight back up again. And the researchers did their investigations on preschoolers at Stanford's nursery school. So say what you will about the type of children who were at that nursery school, but it was supposed to be a representative set of children. They were divided into 3 groups. One group observed aggressive adult behaviour towards the dolls. One group observed non-aggressive behaviour, and another group was not exposed to any behavioural models. One of the main findings, and I stress this is that one of the main findings, was that children who observed the aggressive model made far more imitative, aggressive responses than those who were in the non-aggressive control groups. And this led to the idea of social learning theory, that we learn not purely because of behaviour, but because it's done in a social context and it's a cognitive process. So it draws everything together. What we also can deduce from this and further studies is that learning can occur by observing a behaviour and by also observing the consequences of that behaviour. So again, we learn in a social context. We can also know that modelling is incredibly important here. And to anyone working with children and young people, I'd imagine that this is not new information to you. We know that reinforcing plays a really big role in learning, but it's not the only thing that's entirely responsible, as it were, for learning. But we also know, this is really crucial, that the learner, so the child in this instance, is not a passive recipient of information. There are lots of other mutually important things that can influence. And my question to you here, in light of this particular experiment and all further experiments that have very much supported this idea, is how does this link to universal preventative PSHE? And if you can, think of some tangible examples. You might like to focus on the idea of modelling and how learning is not just about behaviour. It's a cognitive process in a social context. Moving on a little bit there from the social learning theory angle, we can now then move on to look at valuing diversity and what this means in practice for your whole school. So taking all of the things that we've said so far in a more theoretical construct, what does that actually look like in practice in school? How can we do what we want to see more of? What would we like instead? Crucial, I think, to start with developing an ethos that fully acknowledges and values diversity. We don't want a school where those things are just paid lip service to. We want them to really be embedded. And therefore we need to look at policy as a whole school staff, sticking to policy, making sure policy is really thought about in context, and to make sure that it echoes what's done in practice and vice versa. We need to be able to value, address and monitor inclusion. So what needs to happen to ensure that everybody can participate in school life as fully as possible? And one of the main ways of doing that is to consult. Make sure you do a consultation. And because of consulting, it does mean that we can therefore try to avoid as many assumptions as possible. However, knowing what we know about human behaviour, sometimes we do have to make some assumptions. So it's a fine line, and it's one that is best done in collaboration and also best done with a sense of experience. Staff training. Keep on training, keep on learning, keep on maintaining your practice and elevating your practice as much as you possibly can. Be aware as much as you can. Be vigilant about any resources that you're using as well, particularly in PSHE. Do they value diversity? And I don't, again, mean paying lip service to. I mean, consult about these sorts of things. Are they hitting the mark? And then also what we're wanting is really for schools to have a sense of vision and a determination, not a dogged in the face of everything determination, perhaps a quiet determination that shows resilience, that shows that people are being heard, people are being listened to. And then a little bit more about this from Sarah in a moment. Challenging situations, not challenging people. How do you adopt a whole school ethos where you can safely and fairly and positively challenge situations in order to get to what you want? And then thinking again, a pondering point, how does this link to universal preventative PSHE?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Really insightful. Linking back to some of the evidence and research that we started today's session with, I'm just thinking back to trauma-informed approaches, strengths-based approaches and so forth. Many of us already work really hard to be compassionate in our work, kind and empathetic, but we don't always get it right. There are times, I mean, I'm just talking about myself here really, there are times when I get it wrong. There are times when I say something and as soon as I've said it, I want to put it back in the box, but I can't take it back. I sometimes get it wrong, and it's usually very unintentional. But the thing is, I learn, and I'm just thinking, reflecting back, we were talking about attitudes and values, and I'm thinking back to my own childhood and some of the things that I heard within my family environment. They were not empowering. They were quite polarizing, and things that I would not want to be using terminology or even thinking in some of the ways in which maybe I was brought up with. So it's quite interesting, and you think about your own journey when you start unpicking these sorts of things. And our journeys are very often quite long journeys, and it is about just learning. It is about staying with it. There's some of the things that Joanna has just said. But once you learn that a term might cause offence, then don't use it. If you think that something that you might say is offensive, don't use it. Again, reflect on it, and there's a little bit more thought around that. But why would you be using something that would cause offence to somebody else and go against maybe some of your values around equality and being kind and compassionate and caring? And again, if you are caught out, or if somebody does pick you up on something, it's not a nice feeling, but just try not to be defensive if you're caught out. We are all caught out at some point. Absolutely, but just try and take it as a learning experience and reflect on it and think about why this situation might have happened. And just be aware that language does change. I'm just thinking about my own parents and some of the things that they say, some of the things that they actually think are fine, I really find quite offensive. And but that's because, and I do have a recognition that laws were different when my parents were young. Language was different. The types of schools that they attended or the segregation within schools was quite different, and things have changed over time. So just be aware of that and try and keep up to date, and try and challenge others if it is appropriate and safe to do so. And just remember that in most situations, not all, but in most situations, a label is not necessary. We don't have to label people, and it can be quite, it can put ceilings on people, and it can be very restrictive, and it can be very narrowing and challenging for people. So labels are not always necessary, although sometimes they can be helpful because we are empowered when we get a label that makes things make sense. So again, it is all about, Joanna said about pondering, but it's all about where this sits on our reflection. And I think one of the best ones there is, if you don't know or you're not sure, ask. Just ask. And I think if you are being kind, if kind and respect and equality comes from everything that you're taking forwards, then you're in a good place, even to ask. So we don't learn if we don't ask, and try and move things forwards. So just a reflection. This session has been maybe quite thought-provoking, maybe been a time for you to reflect and think about possibly yourself, maybe your own environment, maybe the way that you plan your lessons, your school culture, and hopefully where all those things intersect. And you've probably noticed things, or possibly noticed things that previously you've not noticed. So hopefully it's given you an opportunity to do that. Some of you will be very aware of the importance of values and equality, and this will be something that you have read about, you've reflected on, and you've had staff training on it before maybe. And for others, it could have been quite new for you, depending on where you are. So you might be finding it quite helpful to just jot down a few points that you maybe want to take away and do some more thinking around. Certainly the Surrey Healthy School self-evaluation tool, when you start reading through the standards within that, they will give you more things to reflect on and think about, how engaging you are with your pupils and how you support equality within and across your school curriculum. And it will also signpost you to documentation and resources to support you with that work. But we would like to give you just a few minutes to consider the questions, and again, if you want to pause the video here and just take a bit of time for reflection, then please do that. If not, just thinking about how aware are you of equalities and inequalities within your own life maybe, but really for this training in your setting, in your school setting, How do you ensure that your whole school or whole system across Surrey approach to improving equalities, how are you ensuring that? And how can you best work with others? So that would be your school staff, it could be your community, it could be your pupils, it could be wider Surrey services, wider partners. It could be engaging with some of the national bodies that there may be in and around these areas of work. And how will greater equality and inclusion within your school school culture and wider and community, how will it impact upon things like pupil well-being? How will it impact on your attendance figures? And that could be staff as well as pupils. And it could also be, we don't measure parent attendance necessarily, but how engaged your parents and carers become the more inclusive you are as a school. And it will be very interesting also to look at your pupil outcomes as well. And how you measure the outcomes is down to you, but just pupil outcomes in general, whether that be health or well-being or whether it be achievement and attainment, that's down to you. And just to pick out and think about some next steps, and those could be personal next steps, they could be professional next steps, and they could be for you as an individual, or they could also be for the school and how you're going to take things forward as a school. A lot to think about. And just want to highlight the Surrey Healthy Schools webpage and some additional support. There is the PSHE News, which keeps you up to date with lots of things around wellbeing and inclusion. There may be resources that will help you in this, with your next steps on that. There is the PSHE section, and there's the Healthy Schools section, and there is also the on-demand training section and other sections as well. And I think all there is left is for me to say thank you for engaging with this session, and I hope you feel it's been helpful, and I hope it's going to take your provision and your practice further. Thank you very much.